And a very good morning to you. We're live in London. You're with Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. Coming up today, my guests will share their views on the week's biggest stories, casting their eyes back 7 days, but also Yossi Mekelberg, you're in the studio. Tell us, we have a very, very fast-moving story in terms of the Gaza ceasefire, don't we?
Yes, indeed. I think the ceasefire started, delayed by an hour, but it's there.
OK, thank you very much indeed for that. Latika Bourke will also be joining us in the studio. We'll be heading to Lisbon to hear from our editorial director, Brûlé, and we'll cross over to Zürich for a look ahead to the World Economic Forum in Davos. So a busy Monocle on Sunday lies ahead. It's the 19th of January 2025, live from London.
Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday with Emma Nelson.
And a very good morning to you if you have just tuned in. I am joined in the studio by Latika Bourke, journalist and geopolitics specialist, and by Yossi Mekelberg, senior consulting fellow at the MENA programme at Chatham House. A very good morning to you both. A very happy Sunday to you.
Happy Sunday.
All well?
It's cold.
Yes, it's freezing.
I feel robbed because it was cold and then it got warm and now it's back cold again.
I can never quite understand the complaints by people who move to the United Kingdom that they complain about it's cold. I mean, we are sort of cursed here by birth that it's going to be cold. But for those of you who thought, I know, I'm going to depart the sunny climes of Australia and then be miserable about the cold. How's your week been, Yossi? You've been clearly absolutely up against it, given the amount of, just given how quickly the news is changing.
I must admit, I prefer the weather here than when it's hot, so I'm not complaining about the weather. But yes, it's the first day that I feel a little bit optimistic, cautiously optimistic. We have the first name of the hostages. They'll be released later today. Ceasefire, and hopefully, we won't see more death and devastation that we have seen in the last 15 months.
It is one of those stories that will be moving, and we will keep an eye on it. And if there are developments, we will come to you. We just know that in the last few minutes, the names of the 3 female hostages who Hamas will be releasing, hopefully, fingers crossed today, their names have been released. And in exchange for that, Israel will release, I think it's 90 Palestinian prisoners, isn't it? But we have no exact time for a ceasefire that should have come into being about 2.5 hours ago. Still not happened. We will bring you up to date with that and actually go through the details and the ramifications of the last few hours' events in a little while. But first, let us cross, you two will be happy to hear about this, to sunnier climes, where our editorial director, Brûlé, is basking in 20 degrees sunshine. Tyler, good morning. We are jealous.
Good morning, bom dia, Emma. Good morning. Also guest in Studio One. Listen, you jinxed it. Maybe Latika did as well. I don't know, because let me tell you, when I sent the briefing that it was 20 degrees, that was 12 hours ago. It is now a Sunday morning. There's a little hint of sunshine, but it is not 20. You might hear that there's a Gore-Tex jacket rustling in the background because it's more like 13 degrees, and there is some. Yeah, there's a yellow rain alert on offer from the IPMA, the equivalent of the Met Office here in Portugal. So it's not going to be basking in sunshine today.
It is interesting that, I mean, it is a mere 13 degrees in Lisbon, but this time last week, we both had our thermal long johns on because you were minus 16 in St. Moritz. So one wonders about there's a whole new wardrobe being acquired here, isn't there, Tyler, to be weatherproof? How do you do it whilst retaining a modicum of style?
Well, listen, this is one of those weeks, and I started 2025 really sort of thinking, can I even sort of pack less when I travel? We've had this discussion before, Emma. This involves, of course, thinking through hotels. Do they have good laundry? And then, of course, it's the underwear, T-shirt, and the sock count. And can I get away with just, 3, and then sort of landing and then knowing that, 2 pairs of socks and pants and shirts can sort of, go into the laundry, that they will come back at 6 o'clock at the exact time that I tick the box for their return, and it will all work out well. So, yes, I did have to pack some rain gear for this trip. I did notice that the weather wasn't going to be maybe so lovely later this week, but it was gorgeous. We got here on Friday. It was just sunny, magical. 21, 22 degrees in the sunshine, cloudless days. But I think they're in for a bit of a week of rain here in not just Lisbon. I think much of Portugal.
So you've had the best bit. But what takes you to Lisbon other than a desire for a good hit of vitamin D?
Well, there's been an ongoing project here. This is not the opening of yet another bureau. By the way, I feel like I should be speaking a bit quietly. It is just after 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. I'm in just off of Avenida Liberdade, like in the center of the city. There is nobody out. It is kind of remarkable. If this was, Zurich, for example, where everyone seems to wake up and get going at 5 a.m., this is the absolute opposite. Everyone is having a good old sleep in Lisbon this morning. There are barely any cars. There are barely any people out. Maybe if the sunshine was blaring down, it would be a little bit different. No, going back to why I'm here, I've been a little personal project. My mother has purchased an apartment here. We've been in the throes of renovation for the last, I would say, sort of 6-7 months, and we're now at almost a handover stage that the renovation is almost complete. So we were just inspecting various things, and all looking good. I have to say, I mean, this is really a rare admission, but I've been thrilled with the contractors. They've done such a remarkable job. Great management on the part of the architects as well. But it's just one of those incredible things when you, of course, arrive at a building site, but it doesn't look like a building site, and it's all neat and it's tidy. And this is a bit of this is like a spot check as well. This is not like, we've sort of announced we're showing up at 2 o'clock. This is sort of a case of, we'll be around at some point today. Yes, so far, so happy, but there's probably another 10 days to go. There's some door handles that need to be changed.
And then is there a soft launch or are there fireworks?
There's always a soft launch. Then, of course, it's the fun of furnishing and all of the other things that happen. Of course, there are many things already in storage, but yes, we've sort of fixed Easter as a deadline because that gives you the pressure to really get something done. And family will arrive from Canada and from Sweden, and there'll be a proper Easter. That is the plan. We were sitting at a chicken joint last night, paper tablecloths, plotting what Easter would look like.
Wonderful. After Lisbon and the chicken plotting, chicken dinner plotting, where next? Because I know that your column this week has focused very much on, again, quite a lot of joinery, but this time in Paris.
Indeed. Yes, absolutely. To Paris tomorrow, and Paris for the rest of the week. And I was hoping to join, of course, Gorana and Juliet and Carlotte and everybody in Davos this week. And it seems like there's a lot of fantastic Davos invitations, great talks, of course, good parties and receptions to attend. That's not going to happen. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm heading off to Paris because we have the near completion, near handover as well. It's almost actually in line with what's happening here in Lisbon. But I would say by the end of next week, Emma, we should be in a position to, of course, have training underway. But, the start may be a soft launch of Rue Bachemont. So this is where we are, I would say, emulating, maybe even upgrading what we've done in Zurich. So that means newsstand, cafe, bar, full retail experience, and a proper radio studio as well. Unlike Zurich, so quite a decent space, but we're going back to having a door. No curtains, even though this works very well in Zurich. It just was also part of the architecture of the space. So we'll have radio studio, and we're planning that this very program will be coming from Paris on the 9th of February. That's another sort of hard deadline. I've said it now. This means that we have to complete the space by then and be ready to broadcast. So
anybody who's involved in the launch of Rue Bachemont had better get their act together because it's been said on the radio.
Exactly. And then in line with this as well, as I mentioned in my column, we've been looking for. And again, Emma, you saw this early days in Zurich. We thought, we found a fantastic space, and of course we put desks and we set up a whole office and of course radio studio, etc. But before too long, we sort of ran out of space, or it was more a case of also all of our patrons coming to the cafe were sort of peeking behind the sliding door, and if they could sort of sit on desks and pull up a chair. and also have a coffee or a drink in the back. So eventually we were beaten down and we released that space to our customers, and then we scampered upstairs to the 5th floor of our building on Dufourstrasse. Here in Paris, we've actually we bit the bullet very early on. We said we thought about putting the desks in the back. We even consulted the architects and said, can you do a layout for 8 to 9 people to work in the back office? And we abandoned that quite quickly. And we have a space currently on Rue de Calvaire in the Marais, which is great. But we knew that wouldn't work. We needed to be close by to, of course, where the studio is, etc. So we have found a wonderful space on Rue Montmartre, which is just, of course, Acheron's perpendicular off of it. And we're very happy to report that we saw the space, we looked at it, consulted with lawyers, and we've signed on it. And so that's another project. That's more paint, not too much joinery, coat of paint, maybe some new lighting, and then just hopefully a lot of husky people to move the furniture up 2 flights. Very, very steep stairs. Careful of the heels that you wear when you come to the studio, Emma.
Thank you very much indeed for the warning, Taylor. What's interesting about your column this week is that we established Paris 1, the studio. We established Paris 2, which is the space that you've just described. But it almost feels as if you're mentally moving on to Milan.
Well, maybe because Milan hasn't had as much love as it deserves. But yes, the start of the year, of course, does involve many of us getting out to, of course, meet our readers and visit partners and maybe look at real estate as well. But Milan was more about just, of course, visiting a lot of the main brands that we work with and, of course, just gearing people up for all of the projects that we have coming across 25 and into 26. And one of the amazing things about Milan, which I just noticed in the span of the 18 or 19 hours that I was there, is how you almost feel that Olympic fever has already kicked off because, of course, the Games are about a year away. The Winter Olympics will be hosted between both Milan and Cortina next year. And just I felt like every conversation people were talking about the Olympics, and I think with great enthusiasm in terms of real estate, and already before the Games kicked off, already talking about legacy, and it was wonderful to see. And I guess is this a positive hangover from Paris? Of course, so much, as we know, general grumpiness. I mean, Emma, you were there, in the lead up to it and throughout that period, and just how that energy changed. And I guess maybe here you have an Olympics in Europe, which is coming so quickly off the back of Paris. But maybe just people are already in that positive mood because of course, the great results that we saw out of the French capital.
Speaking of being in a positive mood, let's continue the European land grab mounted by Monocle and yourself this last week. You were in Vienna and you saw how they do hospitality.
Yes, absolutely. So I think hopefully many of our readers have received or picked up a copy of The Entrepreneurs, which has quite an Austrian theme to it. So, of course, there's often a thematic in those issues. And last year we worked with the UAE, and this year Austria came to us and said, could we, of course, work with them and talk about Austrian entrepreneurship? And yes, we traveled really the length of what we know is a very long country in Europe, or the breadth, I should say, of the country. And yes, and of course chronicled, everyone from people making bicycles, the world leader, the world's biggest producer of children's bikes, WEF, Austrian-based, designing in Austria, but manufacturing mostly in Cambodia and Poland, and then through to food retailers and people, of course, in all aspects and areas of manufacturing and design, etc. And we did a wonderful event this week, which was at the WKO, which is the Wirtschaftskammer of Austria, the Chamber of Commerce, which is a federal ministry. It's not just a collection of small businesses. And they have, this is, if this gig doesn't work out, Emma, and you're looking to do something else in broadcasting, they have a division called Lookout. Now, second part of the name, AUT, as out, might raise a few sort of question marks. Is that the best branding? Doesn't matter. They're doing fantastic broadcasting, amazing podcasts, and they're teaching all of their bureaus, all of their various offices around the world to make extraordinary small documentaries. interviews. They run a complete newsroom. And yes, you've spent a lot of time. I've spent a lot of time, of course, visiting companies focused on both inward investment and promoting national brand. I have never seen any organization, especially at the government level, produce a level of broadcasting like the Austrians are doing. And this, that's sort of one side of it. Of course, alongside of that, of course, long lunches, lots of goulash, lots of schnitzel, lots of Grüner Veltliner as well. And as we were saying, the Austrians know how to entertain, and they do it incredibly well.
How do there is that thing, though, that when you jump on the plane from Vienna to Lisbon, then the digest... I'm not going to ask you to be too particular about this, but isn't it an unusual experience when you get on an aeroplane in one place, having experienced the heavy digestive qualities of an Austrian diet, to just sort of like trip lightly down onto the tarmac in Lisbon?
Well, at least there was sort of one day to maybe transition in Zurich, and that involved a dinner at the Oxen, more goulash, more schnitzel for everybody. But I have to say, listen, the Portuguese, of course, as you well know, it's not so delicate at this time of year. There are a lot of heavy soups. There is a lot of sauce here as well. And I have to say, the one great discovery in this country, they know a thing or two about a good pepper steak. The quality of pepper steaks that they do with a very, very good creamy sauce, fantastic. Of course, peppercorns. I like to sort of think that they've been sourced in Mozambique. Amazing. So it's not so light here. Of course, there's plenty of lovely delicacies from the sea. But at this time of year, the menu tends to sort of veer in the direction of heavy, fortified.
Fortified. Thank you so much for that, Tyler. That was our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, on the line from Lisbon, having conquered Europe this week. Latika and Yossi, and let's examine this sort of, I don't know, the idea that lovely feeling that we now just experience of Europe is culturally phenomenally different, depending on, you can go for 1 hour, for 2 hours, and your life and your digestive system experience a completely new world. Latika, bring us into this one, because I know that you're a bit of a fan you're a massive fan of travel.
Well, I am, but it's interesting, since I stopped eating red meat, what cultures adapt to that better than not. And Emma, Andrew Muller can testify to this, because he was sitting right next to me when this happened. But we were in, let's say, an eastern central part of Europe. And the dinner came out, and it was a huge plate of meat and tiny bit of something else, maybe some rice. And I said, I'm so sorry, I'm pescatarian. Do you have anything seafood or vegetarian? And he took the plate away. And then 5 minutes later, they came back and gave me the exact same plate.
Right.
So
okay.
That's a culinary insight for you.
That's all we need to know. Thank you for that, Latika. The time here is 9:18 a.m. Let's head straight. Let's have an urgent change of direction here, because Yossi, just bring us up to date with what is happening with the Gaza ceasefire. We were supposed to be experiencing a Gaza ceasefire, about nearly 3 hours ago. That has not happened. There has been fierce bombardment of Gaza. But in the last, 40 minutes, Hamas has released the names of the 3 women who will be, fingers crossed, released later today, prompting the start of the ceasefire.
Even seems to be better that the ceasefire started 4 minutes ago.
Wow, okay.
That's at least from what comes from the Israeli Prime Minister's office. It says 11:15 local time. That is basically 4 minutes ago. So we need to get confirmation of that. I think that there were some of technical issues there. Unfortunately, it resulted with also some bombardment on the Israeli side. So sadly, some Palestinians won't enjoy the ceasefire because they were killed this morning, and that shows all of us how crucial, how acute was the need for a ceasefire. And we have it here, and I think for the first time in 15 months, we can be cautiously optimistic. It's not going to be easy. It's a very fragile. It's not a ceasefire. It's a truce for 6 weeks. Every few days, a few more hostages will be released. Later today, also 90 Palestinian prisoners will be released. But it's also created a mini, or not that many, political crisis in Israeli government. The member of Otzma Yehudit just resigned from government. The government has the support, the coalition of only 62. Bear in mind the 120 MKs in the Knesset, so 62 is a very, very narrow support now, which the other far-right party is not happy with this agreement either. This agreement will go on because the opposition supports it. But it tells you that, as much as many of us thought that ceasefire is long overdue and could have saved many lives, both of Palestinians and of hostages, it's still not one that has a consensus in the Israeli society and not the Palestinian.
There is so much bad blood here, isn't there? This is. One wonders how long this is going to be able to last. One doesn't wish to be pessimistic about this one, but even the commentary now, just looking at Haaretz, the Israeli newspapers, a ceasefire is taking effect. I think it's, the Israeli government has released information saying that 6 minutes ago the ceasefire began. We'll keep monitoring developments to see what that sounds like. But the analysis even from Haaretz is Netanyahu is counting on Hamas to help him derail the second phase of the ceasefire talks. Already there is talks about how this thing will break down, and it's only been in existence for 6 minutes.
That's how morbid and tragic is the situation. That you don't trust anyone. The Palestinians and Israel don't trust each other, and many within their community don't trust their leadership, and they think there are always their ulterior motives there to continue the war. And one thing, I think, it doesn't take a genius when you have, over the last 15 months, with all the wars around, more than 50,000 people killed, according to revised figures, probably more than that. The devastation, the daily suffering on this, and they still, who is going to help the other to renew the war? I think it calls for new leadership, completely change of, rebooting this conflict and the way they think.
I would say I'm cautiously pessimistic about what's taking place. Like you, I think there's a lot of skepticism about how enduring the ceasefire is, but the mood for optimism here, and I guess the caution is, if we see any of these hostages released, that is a huge, resounding, utterly good thing. They have been in captivity for so long. Why I'm pessimistic is because does anyone really think this conflict is now going to have any lasting peace? I don't. But then again, you do look at some of the structural changes underlying why now. And you have a very united America, actually, in driving this. So I think it's a credit to the Trump and Biden teams that they both together pressed for this and said it has got to be done. And then you have the Iran factor, which, of course, Yossi will be more qualified than me to speak about. But let's see what Trump does on Iran and how weak or strong Iran emerges from all of this.
Yeah, I must admit I'll be not as kind as you, Latika, to the Biden administration, because this deal was there on the table in May, and they could have forced it back in May, and just imagine how many lives would have been saved had it's been agreed in May. There is, I never thought I'd say such positive thing about Trump, that there is always a first time. I think the Trump factor played a very significant role, because I think generally people already try to preempt what Trump thinks and what Trump wants. It's not only in this conflict, in other places too. And in this case, he made very clear, not only Hamas, but also about Netanyahu, that he wants, before he assumes power,
and
tomorrow,
this is the great mystery about Trump. I guess it's not even so much a mystery, but we are back to a rule of the jungle. Trump is one of the apex predators. And for too long, America has been acting as a subordinate to the apex predators that have been roaming the world stage. Now Trump's in the ring and he's one of them and he's calling the shots. People are frightened of him. And you can criticise his methods, but they do work.
There's also the abandonment in, what would you call it, the law of the jungle. That's somewhere I read last week that actually that because you have a president now who almost believes in a world of fiction insofar as he lives in an entirely fictitious world, which doesn't necessarily have any correlation with what everybody else experiences. And he is an incredibly good television sort of storyteller, but beyond that, we're not entirely sure what is going on here. And that is something that we all need to be aware of for the next 4 years. But it does mean it sort of slightly casts into almost a sort of an irrelevant light now, the fact that Joe Biden's steadfast support for Israel is what arguably held him back in so many areas, because he adhered to the traditional rule of this is where America stands, these are who our enemies are, and we play by this book. When you have Trump coming in now, all those previous assumptions are just off the table. Everything will be decided, one wonders, either minute by minute, and there is no sort of geopolitical strategy behind this.
Well, there is. It's American power and dominance. And that's what we're really up against. We have 3 apex predators in the field now, positioning, and let's see how this shakes down. For the rest of us, it's a bit terrifying, isn't it? Because we're seeing our main ally and security guarantor behave like one of them. And where does this all end? Trump is not going to approach geopolitics with the same sort of values that Biden did, and to much criticism, actually, about wanting to preserve democracy, human rights, making sure that things like gay rights in liberal parts of the world are protected and women's rights are protected. These are some monumental shifts that actually a lot of the rest of the free world does want to care about. I think these are the big questions ahead, where those smaller middle power or smaller tier alliances end up at the end of this.
Where does this leave Israel?
Yeah, if I may, you see all the definition, friend of Israel, not friend of Israel. I think this is kind of very old-fashioned way to look at it, because wouldn't be a good friend of Israel stopping the war and saving so many lives in May or even before. Just giving Israel more weapons and not actually searching for a political solution. It looks like friendship, but it's a counterintuitive, for me at least, and counterproductive friendship. I think good friendship is those who will adhere to the principles of reconciliation, of coexistence, of peace, not of, let's keep the killing going forever. But to your question, when it live in Israel, again, in a very fragile situation politically, which is not unknown in Israel politics. It's always on the verge of something and changing.
Sorry to interrupt, but do we know what tipped Israel into coming to the table with this ceasefire? What actually tipped the agreement? Because obviously the Biden camp and the Trump camp say different things, and both claim that they did it. But there was a suggestion that the arm twisting by Donald Trump was quite significant. Do we know what that involved?
And I like the jungle kind of metaphor, because I think there came a bigger beast there that can say to Netanyahu, enough is enough. And he sent a week ago the special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and he told Netanyahu in uncertain terms, that's what President-elect wants. That's going to happen. And Netanyahu, going after months and months, if you listen to his recorded speech, because he won't face the people, he won't face the press, his recorded speech yesterday, it's full of hollow U-turns of things that he has said exactly the opposite for 6 months, of the need for the Philadelphia, the elimination of Hamas, about only military pressure will bring the hostages back. And here comes the new beast in this jungle, and changes the parameters. So something good might come out of it, but at the end of the day, I think gradually we'll have to see the end, and it's not, I think, just my wishful thinking, the end of the Netanyahu era, because I think we see it from public opinion polls. That's what people in Israel want. They want the hostages back, and they want to move on.
Yeah, I agree with that, although one point I would counter Yossi's arguments there is, Gaza aside, and I'm not at all trivialising what's happened in Gaza, it's a humanitarian catastrophe. But if you look at it from being a friend of Israel, actually you have a very weakened Iran. You have Hezbollah neutralised, all but in Lebanon. You have Hamas now weakened. And you have Syria that has fallen. So yes, Biden could have stopped issuing Israel weapons as early as May if that's what he'd really wanted, a ceasefire, then forcing Israel rather than Hamas or both sides at the same time. But a little bit further down the track, you have some significant geopolitical winds that are in not just Israel's favour, but also the United States. So I don't actually think that at the end of this we will be looking back, or those who are friends of Israel will be looking back and saying, gee, we really should have gotten this ceasefire earlier with, at any cost, because the win over Iran has been something that nobody factored in.
If I can counter the counter argument.
Please do.
Is that, two elements here. One of it is hindsight, that things that we don't know they are going to evolve in certain of Hezbollah, Iran joining the war. So in hindsight, you're absolutely correct. However, some people in Israel said we shouldn't go after Gaza the way we did. But already when Hezbollah on the 8th of October joined the war, there was an opportunity to go after Hezbollah and open what you say eventually to get this strategic, you can say it, advantage, victory, however people will look at vis-a-vis Hezbollah. Because one assumed that the pagers were full of explosives back in October of 2023. What was planned? Israel was actually a way better plan to deal with Hezbollah and with Iran than Hamas. So the excuse to go after Hezbollah was given by Nasrallah on the 8th of October, and for the months that the north of Israel was empty. Going after so many thousands of innocent civilians in Gaza that one day Israel will have to hopefully live in peace with them, this is not helpful.
And also, I mean, in terms of the long-term structural changes, Israel has lost so many of its friends internationally. You cannot deny that. And I think that will be very, very lasting to come.
There'll be a rehabilitation. I think most people will be watching to see what Israel does in the next 60 days.
And
Hamas as well.
What happens to Gaza after this? That's what I think is also equally fascinating.
That's the beginning, and there needs to be a huge fund to do that. You need to create the processes and the mechanisms of rebuilding. It's not just the buildings. You need the institution building. You have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of traumatized people that need help as a result of what happened.
And where will the leadership inside Gaza come from? Because Israel will never accept Hamas to be in charge.
So this is a process, and Hamas already accepted should be a government of technocrats. The artificial division between the West Bank and Gaza should come to an end. It should be a PA or a successor of the PA that governs both the West Bank and Gaza. They haven't had election for nearly 20 years. They need new leadership. Hamas is not completely disappearing. It's a force within the political society, within the Palestinian society. But in what shape or form, that's the big question right now, and how to deal with this transformation also of the Palestinian society.
And I would also add, I think it's going to be vitally important that they let journalists into Gaza. We have not had any permission to go in as a journalistic community, and it's an outrage.
Yeah.
The time here in London is 9:33. Latika, Yossi, stay with us. We're going to cross to Zürich now, where we can join our security correspondent, Gorana Grgić, and Carlotta Rebello, Monocle's senior editor. A very good morning to you both. Excuse me. How's Zürich looking this morning?
Good morning, Emma. It is looking quite good, actually. I am surprised at how colder London actually is in Zürich, speaking to the conversation about the weather earlier. But it is a busy morning here at the 90.
And I think we should. We're going to be talking about the World Economic Forum in a moment, because you're heading up to Davos. You'll be one of the great customers of SBB in a couple of hours. But before that, just reflecting on this ceasefire, which by all accounts came into effect about 19 minutes ago in Gaza. How much is the Israel-Hamas conflict going to be a feature of the agenda up in Davos?
Well, probably it's going to take a much greater place in all of the conversations than what would have been expected, especially given that in the risk perception survey that the World Economic Forum published, the state-based armed conflict was the top risk assessed by those 900 people that took part in that survey. So the fact that on Wednesday we have Isaac Herzog, the president of Israel, and Mohammed Mustafa, the prime minister of the Palestinian National Authority, speaking, as well as some of the presidents and prime ministers, foreign ministers from across the region, will inevitably elevate the whole conversation around the Middle East, the future of the Middle East, peace and security, to what could have been expected just a couple of months ago.
Gorana, stay with us on the subject of the World Economic Forum. Let's shift our attention away from Israel. But I think just looking at the situation in Davos, I mean, senior economists now are suggesting that the world is, or rather the global economy, I think it's only 17% of the senior economists surveyed by the World Economic Forum thought that the world was going to grow economically this year. There is, I think, the words pessimism and uncertainty seem to be dominating every commentary as we go in.
Yeah, I think that uncertainty has been for quite some time the sort of mot de jour, I think, or kind of the word of, I would say, probably the past couple of years, because of the increasing fragmentation and just the sort of collapse of all of these rules and norms, institutions that have been governing, among other things, economic relations among states. So this is not surprise, obviously, throw in a mix of conflicts, great power competition, environmental issues, and all of that brings us to that very sort of sad and sobering assessment that we can't necessarily bank on a lot of growth in the time to come. But I think still, if you read through some of the press releases, and again, this survey itself in the report tries to find pockets of optimism. And, the broader theme of this WEF is actually collaboration for the intelligence age, which I find very interesting, that collaboration is still being highlighted as the sort of promise of hope. And there is a lot there in terms of, finding some good stories at the regional level in particular regions, or really focusing on organizations and individuals that could propel some growth and change from these very pessimistic trends.
What do they mean when they talk about increased collaboration in the intelligence age? Because as you mentioned a moment ago, this continued path of fragmentation has meant that protectionist policies have come in, and we are seeing more and more states, and in the world of tech, in the world of finance, actually deciding to sort of close doors. Let's just look at TikTok, for example. That idea that the sharing of information and the open policy that was always associated with globalization is going into a rapid reverse.
You're absolutely right. And I would say that for quite some time, we've had technology really featured sort of in the background, but this time around, I think that there is a lot of maybe tech optimism here around resolving some of these pressing issues. And what I found particularly interesting, even when they talk about the global risks perception, and one of them being misinformation and disinformation, for instance, right? They say we actually should appeal more to the way that we invest in training the humans that are involved in, for instance, producing these algorithms, appealing to those corporations, again, finding those countries that are still happy to fill some of the void that is left these days by the United States, or, that is being challenged by some of the revisionist states like Russia, like China, and try to see where it is that these again, norms and rules can be established or reasserted because it is important that, again, this doesn't fall by the wayside and that we just completely surrender to this construct of we are living in a time when there will be no agreement, right? I think that there is still some hope. Again, if you look through the whole report, there is a lot of calling upon restoring multilateralism, restoring regional orders. Again, if I woke up this morning feeling particularly bad about the world, I would say, well, guys, there is, I would say, tread very cautiously there. But I wouldn't blame them for trying, at least, to appeal to countries like Switzerland for, to be perfectly honest, to maybe hold that sort of agenda and to keep pressing for it. And there are various others who might be interested, right? If you think about the European Union or more, globally, countries from Japan to Australia to Canada and so on, who still benefit from the idea that there should be some rules of the road.
Indeed. I mean, where should we be looking? Because I think there is that sense that there is a fear as we on the eve of Donald Trump's inauguration that we could be, rather unfortunately sucked into the trade narrative and the protectionism narrative and the fragmentation, putting up borders, going exactly in the opposite direction. So if you, for example, were a CEO or indeed a country heading up to Davos this week, where would you be looking for 4 areas of optimism?
Well, again, I would be looking at those particular at the level of nation states, at leaders who aren't necessarily facing major upheaval at home. So I think, yes, Europe probably has more issues on that front than some others. But again, countries that can still pick up that mantle, that care, if you are a small or a middle power, that doesn't want to be necessarily subsumed completely and, lose all the agency they have. Those would be places to look at. And I think that there have been places like that. Again, you look even at regional organizations where even African Union, for instance, if we talk about information and sort of all things cyber, has come up with sort of ground rules of how to go about some of these issues. New Zealand has proposed some. There are countries, in Europe, again, from the Baltics to the Nordics, that have very much this sort of agenda of kind of e-governance, e-society front and center, not just how to deal with cyber threats, but also in the way that, again, they can constructively contribute. And then if I was a corporation, of course, it is about making yourself resilient. It is about diversifying, right? In ensuring that there is enough there to kind of give you some slack should things that are unexpected and dire to your sort of bottom line happen. And then also finding the ways to protect yourself, right? And this is what people like chief information officers and various others can do.
And Gorana, it's really interesting that you mentioned Africa there, because this idea of Africa's momentum really is quite high at the agenda in Davos this year. Ever since the African Union was admitted as a permanent member of the G20 back in 2023, this momentum has been growing. And, all numbers and projections show that by 2040, 25% of the global population will be made up from African nations. So this rise in influence and contributions to global society has become even more paramount. And when going through the program of what we can expect in this year's edition of the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, I was pleasantly surprised to see Africa so high in the agenda, including on the very first day, particularly under the main theme of rebuilding trust, which I think, this speaks to not just geopolitics, but trade as well, as you were saying. So hopefully that also shows a paradigm shift in terms of who gets a seat at a table, in terms of how these conversations actually need to happen with the people, nations that are going to be impacted the most. We know, for example, that global gatherings such as the United Nations Climate Conference, COP, usually tends to fall short on that. The conversations happen with the big players when usually are the small island nations or African nations who are paying the heavy toll for the big players not doing their bit in regard to climate change. So it's really a welcome and positive change to see this at Davos, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Carlotta and Gorana, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Zurich, heading up to Davos in a little while. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. Joining me in the studio are Latika, Bourke and Yossi Mekelberg. Can we just cover a little bit of breaking news that's coming out of Israel? The Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has resigned over the ceasefire. That news broke about, 10 minutes ago. Any great surprise to that, Yossi?
No, he threatened to leave the coalition all through. It's just, not that many regret that he won't be the Minister of National Security, considering what he has done in the police in the last 2 years, which is a completely different story altogether, which deserves a program. But it means that the coalition now relies on 62 members of Knesset, which the minimum majority is 61. So it means it adds to the fragility of the Israeli political system, of also as a result of it, of the ceasefire.
Yeah, Latika, what Yossi has just said, that when you have the security minister resigning at the point of a ceasefire, it does say an awful lot about just how much internal mistrust there is.
Yes, but I think this coalition was always going to fall apart once the war ended. And some would argue that's why the war has been as long as it has, because for as long as it has continued, Benjamin Netanyahu is safe. Let's see what happens to his own position once fighting ends.
There is one point about this. He is in charge of prisons. He made the life of Palestinian prisoners more difficult than ever, to the petty level that he won't allow them even to bake pita bread there, which was one of the things. That's our petty. He wouldn't like to be in charge of the prisons while thousands of Palestinian prisoners are living prisons. It's not a good image for him and not for the base that supports him.
Let's head back to Zurich for a little bit of a change in direction now for Kunsthaus Zürich, the rather magnificent art gallery that you find in the centre of the Swiss city. Refik Anadol's Glacier Dreams is on. It's merging art and climate change in a stunning digital installation. It's open to the public. It opened yesterday. It's just being described as an immersive experience which brings technology and nature together in an unforgettable way. But to tell us more, we're now joined by Andreas Ritter in our Zurich studio. Good morning, Andreas. How are you?
Good morning, Emma. I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me at today's show. And I think after the hard topics you already covered about the war in Gaza, these heavy topics from the upcoming World Forum in Davos, and last but not least, Tyler reporting about the different digesting systems all over Europe. I think it's somehow a very clever way to finalize today's show with somehow an outlook to something really beautiful.
It's really beautiful, but it deals with very difficult subjects as well, doesn't it? Because, having had all those deeply heavy subjects coming along, we're going to throw climate change into the mix, but it is represented in a rather sublime way where you are, isn't it?
Absolutely. So probably if you allow me to start with really some kind of a description of the artwork itself, you mentioned correctly that it is an immersive room, which at these days somehow as a museum experience is really that's something new, that's something which people want to see. We had the Kusama immersive rooms all over the world, very hard to get in because there are queues around the block. Then there is the Pipilotti wristwork at the Zürich Kunsthaus already, which is a magnet, and now the new addition, and probably we will talk about that as well, that it's a very generous donation. It's not only a loan of a corporate collection. This was unveiled now 2 days ago, and my presumption is that it will really attract a lot of new crowd, young people, families to visit his work.
Just explain to us how big an event this is in Zurich, given the fact that the big cities in the world are now embracing this immersive approach to art for good or for bad reasons. But is Zurich ready for something like this?
Well, probably I can tell you that after 2 or 3 months, I think we have to be ready, because the museums somehow worldwide are struggling. They have to develop new experiences as well, and I think it was a very, very clever approach somehow to include now Refik Anadol, as we know, is somehow the superstar in digital arts, and he's an incredible guy working with AI, collecting his own data, feeding a computer. I mean, it's not my citation. He himself says he calls his paintings so-called data paintings, which means that he compares actually the famous Nymphaeas, the Seerosenbilder from Monet, just are literally in Zurich Kunsthaus around the corner in the Brûlé collection. And he says that contrary to a traditional painter like Monet, who used his brush, he will somehow, to paint with pigments, he somehow uses his brush and dips it within his incredibly huge collection of data. We're talking here about 100 million pictures he collected. He traveled himself to Iceland, to the Antarctic to collect own pictures, but of course he used accessible archives for that. And so I think this will indeed be a big impact here. And probably, if you allow me to add a last remark here, I think it's also somehow like the missing gap in between technology and fine arts, because fine arts was always very, very conservative. With the NFT hype and new technologies, the art market opened, museums had to open as well, and Refik probably is somehow the best ambassador to bring these worlds together. And
Andreas, you're an art lawyer. I mean, you mentioned the NFTs and non-fungible tokens and the thing that arguably was, not is. How does your work change when you're not dealing with brush strokes, but you are dealing with a large amount of data?
For me, I'm formed basically as a so-called copyright lawyer, and I always had a good laugh because for COVID, in the art world, literally nobody was interested to talk about copyrights. Artists were stealing from other artists and back and forth. And now in the so-called world after COVID, everybody's, I have the impression, is just talking only about copyright, and therefore for me, of course, it's it's a challenging time. There are constantly new inventions, but I'm glad to participate here with my advice as well.
Thank you so much, Andreas. On the line from Dufourstrasse 90 in Zurich. Let's come back to London now. Yossi, Mekelberg, Latika, Bourke. Let's touch on a couple of other stories in the time that we've got left. It is such a big weekend for news. I think the fact that we'd have a Gaza ceasefire would dominate the news, but we also have the small matter of the Trump inauguration tomorrow, and slightly tied into the topicality of the fact is that TikTok's gone dark in America. What are your thoughts on that, Latika?
I'm not on TikTok. I imagine
How
the
about
experience.
You TikTok?
No.
I was going to say, if Yossi was on TikTok, I might have fallen off my chair.
Latika talk? No, that's not going to work.
No, sorry, we could have
TikTok.
TikTok.
Maybe we should abandon this. I knew the moment I opened my mouth I was on a hiding to absolutely nothing. But actually it's what's happening in America. That there is, if we are to believe the internet, there is mass hysteria that the one thing that keeps 107 million Americans connected to the outside world has suddenly said you can't access the app at the moment.
I think a lot of crying influencers may just seal TikTok's demise more than the American Congress, I might just say. I mean, I don't use TikTok. Let's go back to where we began. But I imagine that TikTok without all the Americans on it must be quite a pleasant experience. I've noticed a lot of my Australian friends this morning have been tweeting and threading and writing on their other social media apps, the ones that I am connected with them on, saying, gosh, isn't it wonderful to open up TikTok and not see the Americans? But let's be serious. Let's be serious. I think we're heading to a real test, and back to our earlier conversation, a real demonstration of what it actually is Donald Trump is going to stand for. Now, as I said before, I think we're in the law of the jungle and he wants to be an apex predator. But is he going to look after TikTok in a way he wasn't willing during his first presidency? What changed in between? Well, he had huge popularity on TikTok during the election. So too have populists right across Europe, here in Britain, including Nigel Farage. He also benefited from donations from a major investor in TikTok. So he has given an interview saying, I'm going to give it a 90-day reprieve. Let's keep in mind exactly what this TikTok ban is about. It's actually not the US Congress trying to shut it down. It's trying to split it from Chinese ownership because the data and danger of public manipulation through the algorithm, which we have no idea what goes on behind the scenes there, they deem it to be a risk when it's associated with Chinese state. Then on the other hand, you have a bunch of other tech oligarchs all lining up to...
all having dinner with Donald Trump.
Well, correct. From Elon, his right-hand man, would-be vice president, whatever he wants to fashion himself as, Mark Zuckerberg doing the most screeching U-turn that you've ever seen. I mean, what a scene. In another way, Jeff Bezos, publisher of The Washington Post, also lining up. I'd argue he's probably the least to worry about because his is actually a more traditional version of the baron who owns a bit of media for influence and is sucking up to the person in power. And I think this next Trump administration is going to be a big, big moment for tech. It could solidify its power in the United States, but at the expense worldwide, because as your correspondents from Davos are talking about, there is a global backlash against tech beginning. At the moment, it's very piecemeal. You know, it's about Chinese state ownership in the US. In Australia, it's about kids under 16 and social harms. In Albania, it was under the pretext of social harms that entire app got shut down. You might remember there was some protests in New Caledonia, and the French government just shut it down. In Romania, we saw a populist elected off huge TikTok popularity out of nowhere, and those results were actually overturned. So I think the next couple of years are really going to crystallise how the world starts to respond to big tech. Is it going to be America versus the rest? And who's going to lead that?
Do you think, Latika, that this is because TikTok is Chinese, that had TikTok come from the West, then actually there wouldn't be all this brouhaha, that there would be a natural trust among Western leaders to accept it into our lives?
Look, it's absolutely the case. And Elon Musk has actually done more to further this understanding, I think, in the global mind than anybody else. Elon Musk gets on X every morning and says, today I'm tweaking the algorithm to do X, Y, and Z. Now, sometimes it's just a more mechanical way that you would use the social media platform X. So he might say, today I'm going to make sure that people who post about this sort of content get seen more. Now, we know, therefore, that these people can just wake up and say, I'm going to tweak something today. That's what you're going to see in your feed. And anyone who uses these social media platforms knows that that is the end experience. So it's great to have Elon actually saying it from his own mouth. This is how it works and this is how easy it is. We have no oversight over what TikTok does. To answer your question, yes, obviously the American Congress is saying if this is under American ownership, we're fine with it. That doesn't still solve the global problem of American tech giants, American tech oligarchs, American tech barons who are cozying up to Donald Trump. And that, I think, is a big question.
The time is 9:58 here in London. I'm afraid we have to say goodbye to Latika Bourke and to Yossi Mekelberg in the studio because that brings us to the end of the programme. I hope all your algorithms have been tweaked nicely. Thanks also to Gorana Grgić and Carlotta Rebello, who is in Zürich, Andreas Ritter, also in Dufourstrasse 90, and Tyler Brûlé in Lisbon. Thanks to all my production team as well. Desiree Banley, Carlotta Rebello. Our studio engineer was Lily Austin. I'm Emma Nelson. Monocle on Sunday is back at the same time next week. But until then, goodbye, thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of your weekend.